Bridget. Hey, Liz.
Hello.
Hi,
Welcome.
how are you guys doing? Good to
So,
see you.
Good. Good to see everyone.
yeah. Um, I'm really excited to do this. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I feel like, especially during the pandemic, the conversation about race in general in the country has sort of risen to the forefront, um, and I know the three of us have wildly different experiences, um, but all three of us have the same thing in common of being biracial. Um, so I just like kind of would like to ask you what your experiences have been growing up biracial. Bridget, let's start with you.
Wow, that's a great question. So growing up, the first time I think I experienced feeling a little different was in middle school. I was called a lot of names from Oreo to Mocha Mix. I don't ever forget those names. I felt like I didn't necessarily fit in. I was kind of struggling with my identity a little bit. And at one point, it was really hard to talk about, but I felt like I just wasn't sure about my blackness. And people would say, "Oh, you're black, you're this." I'd be like, "Oh, I'm tan, I'm not black." Like I was kind of confused about where I stood. I got made fun of a lot. And as I grew up, I really regretted the way I thought when I was younger. I really regretted kind of trying to fit in and please other people. Like I just remember that black people didn't necessarily accept me. The white people weren't sure what to do with me. And the Latino community, for some reason, they just had a problem with me. I'm not sure why. I was teased a lot by them more than anybody else. That was when the wannabe white girl stuff would happen. And so I think that was the battle because I always had friends from different backgrounds. I never really saw color, but people saw that with me. And so I grew up in kind of like a white neighborhood where a lot of the people that would um, pick on me would kind of bust in from out of town. So that was kind of tough, just trying to, I guess, fit in growing up. I was always a happy kid, but I didn't really realize I was different until people pointed it out to me.
Yeah, I think that's something that kind of rings true. I would imagine. I mean, it does for me definitely. But Liz, what about you?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing, Bridget. And I'm sorry that, that those things happen to you and those people call you names because all those things stay with us and, shape who we are today. For me, well, I was the only biracial person in my family, in my nuclear family. And I was the only Black person because I'm Black and Filipino. And I think, to your point, I didn't notice I was different until people told me. But it was instantaneous from like a young child to now that you're the Black one, which then had its own negative connotations underneath. Um, which obviously can be, I think all Black children know that when you come out into this world that you're like, oh, the system is not created for me, right? And fortunately enough, although my parents are together, my dad had a very strong Black identity, and I think how your parents identify really also shape how your relationship to race as well. So um, he had a lot of pride in being Black, so he would also try to share that with me. But then there was this constant battle of having one side that has so much anti-Blackness, and not to say that my Black side doesn't, have its own issues in terms of anti-Blackness, but there's always like this battle of one side telling me to embrace my Blackness, and then another side saying that it's bad that you're Black, right? But these are all like subtext. No one is like outwardly
Sure.
saying these things to me, and but it's all underneath, and those are the messages that I received as a kid. So then growing up, I would try to fit into any sort of mold that was like either closer to whiteness or yeah, essentially. And it's hard to say, but I think it's also like you have to like face that fact. But that was like part of um, the process of really facing my like internalized racism, because this will probably be a whole other conversation, but like talking about hair, like growing up, I had nobody in the home who had my hair. And so being so isolated that way, and then being surrounded by people who had straight hair, and everyone around you has straight hair,
Yeah.
like and so there's so much hatred there. And then wanting to, like, once I get older, like as a kid, one of my biggest dreams was to have straight hair. Like, that's like,
Mm.
all I want. And then finally I started straightening my hair and things like that, and I look back, because I have my hair natural now and I continue to wear it that way. But I look back at all those photos and I'm like, why? Oh no. Like, one, I think I look like a pinhead. I was like, that just doesn't look good on you.
Right, yeah.
But so much, it's so hard to look back at myself and see how much of me I was trying to erase,
Oh yeah.
just so that I could,
Fit in, huh?
yeah, fit in. And then, you get all those questions like, what are you? Da, 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 and you're like, fetishized, exoticized, and a
Mhm.
lot, mostly by adults.
Yeah.
It was mostly the adults who would say kind of like crazy things to me. And then the kids would follow, because they would mirror what the adults were doing. So um, that's overall like a scattered brain answer to say that, like, there was a big push and pull, a lot of me trying to shift myself. And then maybe about my early 20s, um, did I really start working on how to, not only like accept myself, but come back to myself.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the power of the internet, really, just seeing all these Black and brown girls really just like embracing themselves. And it really showed me it was okay to do the same. And I just like, I can't even imagine like my what I'd be like if I didn't go through that. Like, and if I was still that same person trying to like hide myself.
Mhm.
um but yeah, it was essentially just a tug of war, and wanting to be something I wasn't. uh,
Yeah.
How about you, Richard? What was it like for you growing up?
So I'm half black and Mexican. Um, and I grew up with the Mexican side of my family, my mom's side. I didn't know my dad or that side of the family at all.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I was the one. I was the one uh, uh, black child person in the family for a while. After a while, one of my cousins married a black man, and they had kids, and at that point, I was like, okay, now my family starts to look like me a little bit.
mm,
Um, that was cool. I remember the first time I honed in on it was elementary school. It was around this time of the year because I remembered we were learning about bones. And it was because it was like Halloween time, and like the teacher was was incorporating that into the lesson.
Mhm.
And we were getting ready for recess or something, and a couple of the kids in the class, a couple of white girls, um, said to me, like, oh, well, your bones must be brown because you're black,
ooh,
right? And I remember it that those words, just because we had just gotten done hearing about how we all our bones are the same, and then this was said to me, and I don't know like how this happened, but I left the classroom, and I remember finding myself like near like the kickball field, and just crying. And I didn't know why. Like there wasn't like a, oh, I've been racially it was just like, oh, I'm different, and I got called out for being different in a
Yeah.
way that with a tone that was intentional. It was intended to hurt. Um and like you said, Liz, like it's kids. Like, I'm a preschool. I was a preschool teacher for many years, so I've seen the innocence of kids,
Mhm.
and then I've also seen the kids who parrot what their parents are saying.
mhm.
My first year teaching, I had a child who came up to me and said, "I don't like black people."
Boo!
Yeah, right. And I was like, and
Yeah.
I was shadowing another teacher. So I was like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do with that? And she was like, just love him. Just love him. And I was like, okay. And I wasn't sure what to take of that. And I went home, and then the next day I was like, yeah, I'm going to love him, and I'm going to make him like me. and
Sure.
I'm gonna make sure that I'm his favorite teacher because it's his mom. It's his mom who put those words into his mouth.
Mm.
And yeah, by the end of that semester or school year, I was his favorite. Um, but anyway, the growing up in this sort of like the literal black sheep, right? Like, yeah, where you're trying to find like where do I connect? What and also like my family didn't talk about my blackness at all. Like it wasn't talked about. The identity of my dad was secretive. It was all
Mm.
so for me being black, it was a source of shame as well because
Mhm.
it wasn't talked about. So if it's not talked about, then it must be bad. Uh,
Wow.
Mhm.
and yeah, it was a it was a long time before I was able to really look at myself and see how all of that sort of affected me. I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, it probably wasn't until like the last 7 or 8 years that I've really connected to who I am as a black man, you know?
And how do
Mhm.
you think that happened?
Um,
What changed?
I think a big part of it, and I know this is sort of what we're talking about today, but a big part of it was improv,
Mm,
was sort of being in this environment where we're creating these stories, but you have to have a sense of identity to tell these stories, to do these things and
sure.
um, yeah, and then also just I mean, especially like in the last 4 years under the current administration, I think there were a lot of things of like, oh, when we see the things that are happening to the black community in
Mm,
America, there are moments, not moments. There's recognition of, oh yeah, I've had that fear. I've had that fear my whole time, like my whole life. I just never I just like disregarded it because it wasn't no one talked to me about it. Like uh, Joe Biden at the debates mentioned the talk that black families have. Um, I never had that talk. That was not a talk. My mom never spoke to me about what my experience was going to be like as a black person.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was hard, but I think I'm really, really grateful. I think for the experiences. Grateful may be the wrong word, but they've made me who I am, and I feel like I'm investigating that side of myself more now than
Mhm.
ever. Which has led to some really cool things happening. As far as like researching like my dad and finding out some stuff on that side and just connecting to who I am. Which is
Mhm.
the best any of us can do. You know.
yeah.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're on that journey. Um, and thank you for sharing. I definitely hear you on like being the literal black sheep.
Hmm.
You're like, this is cool.
Yeah.
Um, and I definitely hear you on for me, like what it's like having a parent who doesn't racially identify that exactly the same, but also has no idea what to do with your blackness
Mm.
and therefore ignores it,
Mm,
and it really messes with you. um, because yeah, I had a similar thing. If my blackness was talked about, it was talked about in a bad way, a negative way, and but then overall they just try to erase it, and you're like, well, this is who I am,
mhm.
and if there's something about me you don't like, then all of a sudden I'm black.
Mm.
And then but then if you're cool with me, I'm not black anymore, and it's like you can't, you don't dictate, my racial identity.
Yeah.
But it's weird as a kid how you can really get, stuck in some really messy waters based on, the projections of others.
Yeah.
Did you
But
grow up, Liz, like were your friends from different backgrounds? What kind of neighborhood did you grow up in? Were your friends majority like white, or did you have black friends, and how was their influence on you?
growing up, I was growing up then, it was a predominantly Filipino neighborhood,
Oh, wow.
lots of Filipinos.
Okay.
And in terms of friend group, I had quite a bit of friends from different racial backgrounds,
Mhm.
which I'm very grateful for. And my friend groups still kind of emulate that. but there wasn't too many Black people in the neighborhood.
Hmm.
And I had a few Black friends, and one of my friends growing up, especially in middle school, and I need to share this with her, that she was so important to me and my identity. She was like another goofy Black girl. And we were both able to like be ourselves with each other and relate to each other in a way that I couldn't relate to other people. And and then I also started to realize, our own differences and different struggles, because there are privileges with being biracial and being lighter skinned, right? So I was able to really investigate that more as I got older. Being friends with her also taught me a lot about that and the different struggles that she faced that I didn't have to. And yeah, we were both just trying to be ourselves, and she was so important to me. And like, I think it's so important for children to have people that identify with the same as them, even beyond racial background. Because yeah, it was so important for me, because then I felt less crazy. Because I felt so crazy being the only Black person and feeling these things and having these struggles with myself and my hair and
the hair, girl, I remember those times.
Yeah, and then it's so important. You need somebody to talk to make you feel, again, I should use a different term besides crazy. I just was so like, am I making this up? Like, am I making up all my own struggles? Because either no one would talk to me about it, or if you brought it up, they would diminish it or try to make it seem less of an issue. And if you notice racial discrimination, everyone's like, you know what you're talking about. And you're like, what? But yeah, so I had a few Black friends, and they were so important to me. And I think it's so important for Black children to be around other Black folks in some capacity. I know that can't be possible for all folks, but I do think it's important to have other kids who grow up like you. So I did have kind of like a multiracial upbringing, which really helped me out, but still not enough Black folks as I would have liked. Because that particular friend I was referencing, she moved away when I was in high school, and I was like, no. Yeah. And, and at the time I couldn't articulate that. I was like, I need you in this space.
Yeah.
Because then I'll be alone again. And that was really hard for me. But yeah, I think my school was pretty, like, there was a lot of Asian folks, but there was a lot of middle to upper class white folks. And that definitely like shifted me as well.
What area did you grow up in, Liz?
I grew up in San Diego, SD, more northern county area. San Diego's so huge. I grew up in a place called Rancho Penasquitos. And yeah, I had a lot of Filipinos. But now when I go visit home, there's a lot more white folks in the area. Or like a pushing out of poorer brown people, and then an influx of more middle to upper class white people. So it's not as brown as it was when I was there. And I was very grateful. Like, I realize it now that I was very grateful that there was a lot. Grew up around a lot of brown people and a lot of Latinx folks. Hello, I was listening to you.
Where did you grow up, Brigette?
I grew up in Long Beach. Yeah.
Oh, work.
I've been here my whole life. I was fortunate enough, being half Black, half white, I got the best of both worlds. And that's what my mom used to tell me, because I, was confused. You don't see that many people that look like me. I think there's one or two, maybe one mixed brother at my school, that I saw, because it wasn't as popular as things can be these days, and I'm, getting up there in age. So this was a long time ago. But, because I was raised in a home where we celebrated both sides, I had my Black side and my white side. So I just thought that that's how everybody was raised. I thought, so then you get older and you hear about discrimination and you're like, wow, not everybody grew up in a family like mine, so it's hard. And as you said, as you get older, you start really kind of having a different perspective, because you see how other people see you or view you. And I don't know. I was really bullied a lot. I don't know about you guys, but it was really bad in middle school.
Mm,
Name calling, harassing, like putting awful things in my locker. And I was just like this, quiet kind of kid. I wasn't controversial, but
hmm
I just, for whatever reason, I was a target. And then I started getting feisty because I, stood up for myself. But that was, like I said, middle school was tough, but high school wasn't so bad. I don't know. I felt like maybe I don't know, came into myself more. Um, but yeah, I just remember specifically middle school was tough for me. But my best friend was black, and we both grew up in the same neighborhood. Our experiences were very different than other black kids at my school, and also too, like I said, initially the black community, and sometimes today still, I get teased about, she's not really black,
Mm.
or like, even when I went to an improv show, um, and they were asking something about something from the audience, and I made a comment. They're like, "Oh, she's a high yellow, like she ain't really black." You know what I mean? So it's kind of like there's still that kind of joking, But I mean, I get it. It's like just because we don't have two black parents, I guess in their eyes, some people's eyes, were not black enough. But I've had, experiences, and I still feel it in my heart. And when I see things and unrest and discrimination, I feel it just like they do, whether I have one black parent or two. It's still very painful for me. So
mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
When I was growing up, there wasn't a um I didn't have a lot of black friends.
Mm.
I you know once I got into high school, I went into the theater department, and that's where I found my world, and my community. And within the high school theater department, there were definitely, that's when I started to make more black friends, because I think theater sort of brings together people who don't fit into other boxes, you
Sure,
know?
I
mhm.
see that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, but there were definitely a lot of times where I was where yeah, like I wanted to know, I just wanted to know things. How do I do this? Or the opposite, like things that were expected to be known of me, that I was expected to know.
Sure.
I remember like my first day when I went to like Bellflower High School, and it was like PE, and it was like time to like choose kids for like the basketball team, and I was like one of the first ones picked, and I remember thinking like, no, no, like that's not, mm-mm. And they regretted that choice.
I can.
um, uh, but yeah, then I found theater, and that was great. But also, like I had I was also gay,
Mhm.
was back then. Now,
You were, yeah.
yeah, um,
Through high school.
yeah, that was my high school phase. Uh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
but so that also added an element of, you know, gotta gotta hide that, don't talk about that, you know.
Mm,
Um, but it was in theater that really, that's where I found like my place where being other people eventually led to me finding out more about like myself. um
mm.
Liz, I know you did you did theater and acting prior to, getting involved with Held Together and Improv. What was that experience like for you, going into a theater space, an acting space, um, as a person of color, and particularly like of mixed races?
My very first musical was in the sixth grade, Oliver. I was orphan boy. And yeah, and I think from there, I continued to, be in love with theater, acting, drama, all that. And in high school, there was an improv club, and I went with my friend, um, my goofy black girlfriend. I would say her name, but I was like, I didn't ask her if I could say it, so
Sure, yeah.
it meant y'all. Yeah, so she we both were in love with Whose Line Is It Anyways at the time, and we're seeing Wayne Brady, to see like a black dude who is like so goofy and just like putting himself out there, really, I didn't even realize how that changed things for me. Um, so yeah, we did this like after school improv thing, and we had such a great time to just like be ourselves. But then also there, we started to notice, I started to notice the different labels you would get as a Black or brown girl, like, you know, the stereotypes they put you in. And at the time, because I'm not as racially critical as I am now, I didn't really think much of it. And I'm also adding to some of these messed up stereotypes, right? So I'm just like playing along. I'm like, yeah, I can be this girl, that girl. But then also what I noticed as I continued to get older and do more theater, um, I started to realize because I'm more ambiguous to folks, they don't know where to put me, so they don't know what to do with me, and that had like its pros and cons. Um, I think when you're more, I think when you're ambiguous, so in this sort of like white led world, you can kind of like slip through the cracks of things. Like I was allowed to be goofier in a way that I think some other POC women can't, especially if you're darker skinned. So that was an interesting turn. But then also like just seeing all the discriminatory labels I would get. So like I did a lot of drama in college, and that was really fun and great. But obviously, you notice when you're reading monologues and stuff like that, um, they, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't put a race, but you know that this is for a white girl. You know, you're like, this isn't for me, but I'm gonna try to make it for me if I can. And I think the sharper my racial and critical lens became, I started noticing more things in improv when I found the held together space. Um, like, you know, I think improv really exposes you in like so many different ways, even like layers of yourself that you're not thinking about. So when I started out, you know, I would get labels like mail order bride, or like, and oh, there were some like interesting ones when you're like, really? And um and and it's also very interesting to be like a woman of color in this like white straight man space, because I'm always like fetishized on stage or a sexual object, um whereas the other people around me, especially white folks, will like get doctors, engineers, friendly neighbor. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah, you a hood rat.
yeah. And I was like, cool. Yeah. And then, but what it helped me do is really turn things on its head a lot faster.
Yeah.
And show people themselves a lot faster.
Mm.
I remember I labeled somebody a white supremacist. They were like, ugh. And I was like, yeah, dude, that's what it is. If you're gonna label me, you know, something ridiculous, but maybe not too far off. But yeah, it's improv itself. The more critical I became, I was able to to really see what was underneath people when they see me, because like, you know, when you play improv game, you just come up there and you just blurt stuff out. And so especially during the intro phases, I was like, okay, that's it's very interesting how that goes. Um, yeah, so I mostly started noticing more stuff, or maybe I was able to name things more as an adult, because I think those things had always been happening. I just wasn't really able to name some of the messed up stuff that was happening. And I think the last thing I'll say is that I think doing drama, theater, improv, all that stuff, it wasn't until I got older that I really embraced trying to be in the forefront. I was always the like a silly best friend, always the person in the back, and I was always cool with playing that supporting role because I was like, oh, they get to be funny and goofy. But I never saw myself in TV or anywhere, or even like in real life, as like the center person. Because that I felt like that role wasn't meant for me, and I had never saw somebody like me there. And yeah, as I got older and as my confidence started to build, I was like, oh, I don't always have to put myself as the second person or label myself as like the person in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because when you see shows and stuff, if they do add a POC, it's like the friend, you know, that they grew up with, so that the viewer can see that the protagonist is not racist. They're like, look, I have a black neighbor friend. Yeah. So then I would kind of like unconsciously make myself that person too, in roles and labeling.
Yeah. The idea of not seeing yourself and not like same. Like there was never a like, you know, gay, biracial lead of a show or play or anything. And so like when I would audition for stuff, like I remember, so like in high school we did the musical Once on This Island, which is,
Oh, love that one.
but our school did not have the people for that show.
Because it's very explicit,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
About having black folks on this island.
our Team Moon, who is traditionally a black woman in that show, was a white girl who was
No,
not really.
no, they didn't.
Yeah, and she wasn't really even like she wasn't an actor really. We're not Facebook friends. I doubt she'll see this.
You said it wasn't good. I'm letting you all know.
Yeah, it just wasn't, and then we did The Wiz the next year, and I remember thinking, wow, like, and we cast a black Dorothy, thank goodness, but still, like the majority of the cast was, it was not what it could have been. And then going into post school and getting into like community theater and stuff, I found myself getting cast in stuff that, like you said, Liz, like were not written for someone. Like, they were written for white actors. Like, you just know, you're like, okay, this is what, I'm gonna adapt it for me, but there's only so much of that I can do. I was in a show called De Donde, about immigration, and the show is divided between like the immigration lawyers, and the immigrants. And I remember reading the play, and there was a lawyer character that I really, really liked. And I was like, oh, I wanted, and at the audition, I came in like, a button down collared shirt and a tie, like a very like, look at me, I'm a lawyer, and cast as the immigrant, and it was fine. Like the character, it was whatever, but this was still a place where I had seen colorblind casting before, and was like, oh, but not in this show. And there's a part of me that understood that it was about a certain time, and it wouldn't have made sense necessarily. But then I think, but also, what did it make sense for me to be in the Grapes of Wrath? Like, like that I know. Yeah, there's just a lot of erasing sometimes that you have to do when you get on stage. What about you, Bridget? Is there? I don't know this about you. Did you do theater and stuff before improv?
Never did. Nope. I started doing improv when I started doing improv. That was it.
I don't believe you.
Yeah,
What?
I never did. I was too afraid. Like, I was always the class clown. I was always the goofball with my friends, but the fear of actually doing it in front of other people would paralyze me. I mean, when I was little, growing up, even in middle school, I would always like write little plays. I was like in little plays when I was a kid, like kindergarten. I was like, I think a toy soldier or something. And then, but I never really performed. Now looking back, I wish I would have, like in high school. I would have been like in the theater group, but honestly, like, that's why when we do sketch, Richard, I would get so afraid because memorizing lines was always hard for me, because I was so self-conscious I would ruin it for somebody else. Because that's what happened to the little kid in kindergarten. He forgot his line and he cried and he ran off stage. And I remember I was sitting there like this, and then the curtains closed because I made me nervous. So I forgot what I was supposed to say because he ran off.
Yeah.
So, but no, I never embarked on any sort of acting until I did some, like, at one point, I think I tried to get an agent and like audition, but like that didn't really turn out so well.
Oh.
So then I went into improv. And it's funny because I think about you, especially Richard, because you're like my brother from another mother. So, I mean, I always think about us whenever we're on stage together. What are people always calling out for us? Like the blackness and the this and the that. And
Black people, like that's just your
Yeah.
label. They're like, hey, Black person number one and number two.
Tyrone, your name's Tyrone and Jamila.
Yeah.
You guys.
There's nothing wrong with those
Yeah.
names. It's just where they're coming from.
Yeah.
It's not them trying to, because those are real names, and
If it was a Black audience calling out those names,
it'd be different.
like you can tell the intention, because it's like, I think we should use more of those names, and there's so many names out there besides Sally and George.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to name that for a second, that I was like, we know their intention.
Yeah.
Of where
I
it's
always
coming
enjoyed those characters. See, as much as I was like kind of get annoyed by the stereotypes,
from.
I always felt the most comfortable. Like, I think one of my favorite sketches was Rich and I. Remember when we were doing that scene where we were like, I think we were brother and sister or something, that whole thing. And there's something about it I just love. So there's this kind of conflict, but I find myself enjoying those roles more than I think the others, just because I feel like I'm kind of at home, even though it's not necessarily who I am. It's where I like to be.
I get that.
Yeah, that sketch, this Blacker, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, Liz,
That's
if you
funny.
were around during this time, but we were brother and sister, and I was going to her, I think, for advice on like a date or something, and she was giving me advice, and I was very like nerdy, very Carlton, you know. And she was giving me advice on how to be Blacker. And I think what worked about that sketch was that I don't even know if we did this like consciously, Bridget, but like we knew who the audience was. So it wasn't an audience. We weren't performing that for a Black audience. And so part of, I think, looking back on that sketch, part of what worked about it was sort of holding that mirror up to the audience of like, this is what you expect.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah. And, laugh, sure, but also connect with what, and not to say that sketch changed anybody's lives or anything, but like, so-and-so stopped being racist because of that sketch. But yeah, I think that there's a little bit of power that you have, and Liz, you mentioned that as well, as like calling back to particularly like in a scene, somebody who gives you a label, and you're like, all right, well, like I can do that too, and let's, and not like in a let's fight on stage via improv, but hey, look at what you just did, and here's the natural result of that,
Yeah. I think of Angry Black Man too. That's probably one of my favorites. Or Angry Black Wise Man.
Wise Black Man.
Yeah, Wise Black Man. That's right. I don't know. That really made me laugh. That was one of my favorites. And even too, when I did the sketch with Amy in the prison. I don't know if you guys remember, that was a long time ago. We were like prisoners, but we were like fashionistas. Like there's certain things where I just felt like in my element, or I don't know. It just made me happy, just kind of embraced my silly side, because that's when I feel like I could be more myself, when I'm just really in that zone,
Yeah.
And it gets people to laugh, but those are things that stood out to me.
What brought you to improv, Bridget?
Well, I think a lot of it was my friends. They were kind of giving me the nudge, because they were like, you should be doing something with this. You're funny, or this or that. And I think one of my girlfriends, she said she'd heard that there was classes or something. And I think I saw like on Amazon when they used to have like social or something like that. And that's how I got started. I was like, I'm going to just go for it. I was totally afraid. And then once I got into it and I found this community of people that were just like me, it was like finding another family.
Yeah.
But I just felt this kind of calling. It's weird. I mean, people thought I'd be in show business. I mean, I was on Romper Room when I was a tiny little kid, so I've kind of always done something silly. You too?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I was a guest. My cousin was a regular on there. So it was just kind of like, I felt like it was my time to just try something different. So how about you guys? How did you guys transition into improv from like acting?
I was in a relationship at the time, and I was doing a lot of theater. And the first year of that relationship, I had like I was in a play back to back, so that was rehearsals every night, shows on the weekends, and it wasn't good for the relationship. And I directed a play in December. I did the Reindeer Monologues. And one of the actors I had cast was taking classes with Held Together, and I didn't know him. He was the personal trainer of a friend of mine. and and so I thought, oh, okay, well, if I want to focus on this relationship and I still want to connect to what I'm passionate about, um,
Mm.
maybe I'll try improv for a little bit, and it'll be like a class a week, and that'll be fine, and I can focus on that, and then I got into improv and fell in love with it, and and that became um, a strong uh, area of my passion for theater, um, and you know, and here I am still doing it.
The question was, how did we get into improv?
Yeah, how did you find it? How did it find you?
Um, how did it find me? I was in such a dark place, a bad,
Hmm.
really mental place, and I needed help,
Oh,
and I was searching for healing, and I think, like, I really do like acting. Um, when we did the acting comedy class that just happened, I realized how rusty I am. I said, "Whoa, you gotta practice." But when I joined improv, I thought like I was still good at that. But yeah, I was searching for healing, and I had done a lot of drama classes, um, and wanted something like it. But it's there's also this barrier of accessibility. So because all these things are so expensive, so like acting classes are expensive, and I was um, nearing the end of my college days, my undergrad, and so I was like, okay, can't have that. Trying to act in all these places, community theater, all this stuff. I was like, oh, it's kind of expensive. How am I going to do this? And I remembered that I liked improv from the time that I did it when I was in high school, so many years ago. Um, um, but I was also thinking about ways to improve my writing because I really like script writing and I really like sketch writing. And so I was researching all these screenwriters, sketch writers, and what they did. And the common thread was that they did improv. And
cool.
writing is very healing for me. So I was like, and I was reaching a roadblock with my writing. And so I was like, okay, how do I, you know, how do I get back to the thing that heals me? I had to find other ways, for healing. Um, and I was like, okay, let me try improv. I did it before, and this is when I thought I had it like that. And then when I when I went in, I said, oh my god, I do not know what the hell I'm doing. I'm not very good. But I just found it. I found Held Together on Google. I was like, okay, improv in the area, and then they said that they had a free workshop. I said free is good for me,
Yeah.
and being at Held Together and staying at Held Together is also the accessibility part, because so much part of my identity um, is growing up poor, right, and how that has shaped me as a person.
Mhm.
And she still doesn't have a lot of money, so I was like, so how do I thrive in this society and still do what I like a lot of people who have hobbies such as these, you need extra money to supplement those
Sure, of
hobbies.
course. Yeah.
And so the fact that it was free and the fact that Darren offers these payment plans has really changed the game for me. And when I saw Richard, when I saw another POC, and I wasn't sure exactly, I said he's probably black, but something else. I was like, is he Black Filipino? Is he me? I'm not sure. I must ask. Yeah,
I
and
love that.
it it made me realize it was a safer space for me to be in. Like for me, if I walked in and it was like only white folks, then I would have been like, I don't know how long I can ride this train. But the fact that there were so many different types of folks, that really helped me put my guard down a little, because I think as a woman of color, for me, I'm always like on high alert all the time. And that doesn't excuse that I haven't gone into that space, and there's just been like some problematic stuff because so many different people come through there.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's also people who I relate to, such as you both. So that's essentially how I found it and why I stayed. Because I think if things were to be different, I don't know how I would have stayed. But that free improv workshop was scary. That was so scary because I was like, maybe I could do it. And then you're there and you're like, I don't know. I don't know a thing. I
Yeah,
can't
it's
give a
scary.
suggestion. I don't know things. Like you just like everything just
Oh
disappeared.
no, yeah, of course. Me too. It's very scary in the beginning.
And I can't believe that you didn't do any performing before
No.
held together, because you're so, to me watching you and as a fan of you,
Oh,
you're
that's
just so such a natural performer,
thank
and it seems like you've been doing it so long. Maybe you did in your past life, I don't know.
Maybe I did. Yeah, I just but
Maybe
always
I
been a silly goose. Thank you. I just never did it in front of strangers. So, but it has been such an amazing experience. It really was. It changed my life. I mean, it brought me into this world where I have like a new family, met the
mm,
greatest people from all walks of life, forever friends, and it's just it's an unbelievable experience. And I think that everybody needs to try that. And it's good for the mind, it's good for the brain, it keeps your head alert, for, like I said, for everybody, for all ages and stuff. And it's just, I don't know, I really got to get my creative juices out in ways I never had before. So I will be forever grateful. So it's nice to see the new talent coming up and watching everybody and all their talent too. So thank you. I appreciate that. I'm a huge fan of yours. Well, both of you. Um, but I remember when I met you, Liz, I knew I was kind of like leaving the troop soon, but I was like, that's my girl right there.
I
You're
was
like
so
my,
sad when
my
you
kindred
left.
spirit right there. Like, that's my girl
I
right
was
there.
so sad. I was like, this isn't a one girl, like a one black girl in, black girl out type of program. We gotta both be in here. What do you mean you're leaving?
Oh, it's your
When I
turn,
come
girl.
in?
Better represent.
I was like, what? Yeah, but I remember also what the first time I saw you perform was also very impactful for me, to
Oh,
see
wow.
another black girl on stage. And I was like, oh my God, this is so exciting. And to see someone of your talent and of your caliber,
Oh,
I was
thank
like,
you.
oh my God. Like, yeah, moments like that are just so important, because I know that I can't be the only one, to have been changed by just meeting the both of you. Just by
Oh,
seeing the
thank
both of
you.
you, and it really shaped my experience while being at Held Together. It's pretty gnarly how much representation is important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
really.
yeah, it really helped shape my experience there for the better. And I was so excited to meet you. I was like, oh my God. When I first met you, I was like, oh my God, that's Bridget. Oh my
Oh,
God,
you're so
cool.
sweet.
You
Oh,
cool.
I'm just a dork. But like I said, we recognize talent. And yeah, obviously when I saw you the first time, I'm like, oh yeah, that girl.
Mhm.
She's something else. So it's just so sad what's happening with everything with the quarantine and everybody
Mhm.
being isolated, but I'm glad to still see people in action and doing things online.
The free workshops that you mentioned, like, you've mentioned that to me before, Liz, that I was there for that, and what an impact that made, and
You didn't remember me.
I, I
Okay. That's
we have
okay.
a lot of free workshops, and
Yeah, I know,
a
I
lot of
know.
people come through.
That's
Yeah.
Uh,
funny.
but what that did was create an awareness with me, and maybe not create, but shine a light on the awareness of, because I think we all know what it's like to walk into a space where you are the person, regardless of what color, but you are the person of color, and it's
Mhm.
like, all right, okay, cool. But I've been to other places, other schools where that there was no diversity on the teaching staff, and and it's like, well,
Mm,
what does that mean for where I can go within this space? What
sure.
ceilings are there for me? There's a student who's come through classes. I won't say his name because I didn't ask him. But he's a black man, and he's shared in class a couple of times the struggle that he's had with emotion, bringing emotion on
Oh,
stage,
wow.
Mhm.
Mm,
because black men are not encouraged to be emotive,
Mhm.
um, and I know every person, every type of person has things that they are not supposed to be, or they're not allowed to do. Um, but it was really powerful because he shared that, like, we start every session with like the circle of like what brought you to improv, and
Mhm.
he shared that in the opening circle, and I remember thinking, he other than me, he was the black man in the room, and I remember thinking, that's so powerful. Like, I don't know if I'd ever be able to go into a space of strangers and share that,
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
because I have the fear of, well, then what are they going to make of me? Like, oh, well, don't talk, like, he's bubbling up, And it's not so much like I'm bubbling up or that this man was bubbling up, but it's like we just need to be in a space where we can
Mhm.
release some of the stuff that's inside, uh, which improv allows us to do. I think we all have had experiences. We've touched on them a little bit, but have there been moments in classes or in shows that particularly stood out to you as like, ooh, I wish that hadn't have happened, or like for me, for example, like in teaching,
Hmm.
we do the game expert panel, right? Where there's 4 people sitting on stage and the audience gets to decide what type of person each person is, like cowboy, rock star,
Mhm.
ballerina, whatever.
Hmm.
And if there is a black man on stage, 9 times out of 10, rapper or gangster or whatever is going to be called out.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
and it sucks when it's like only the one person calls out and you're like,
Because
keep it coming.
everyone was like, yeah, I was gonna say that
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Everybody like, oh, they took
That's
mine.
the label, I suppose.
Yeah. And and there's been times where I'm like, especially early on in teaching, where I was like, where I would give them that label. Um, and then more recently where I'm like, no, I don't want to, but then also I'm like, but then am I, because there was the same black man got, I think, rapper one time and did an awesome job with it. It was so funny and so clever. And that wasn't, and like, he's not, that's not who he was. So it's like, cool, you got to step outside of who you are. And, so, but it strikes me as those moments of like, I don't want to, you know, um, so what about either of you?
I'm not sure if I can think of anything in particular, like like a specific event, but I think just kind of stereotypes or things that could be hurtful, or even
Mhm.
like some like warm up activities like fortune cookie and stuff like that.
Mm,
Like I would never want to hurt or offend anybody, and I think sometimes there's that balance between being funny or being stereotypical or really hurting someone.
yeah,
Mhm.
I just think sometimes, even though people don't mean to be that way, I think being a stereotype can be hard sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just kind of what we do, and that's kind of our experiences, but never ever wanting somebody to be heard and trying to figure out where do you draw the line, I guess, between
Mhm.
being stereotypical or trying to be funny or really hurting someone's feelings and making somebody uncomfortable.
yeah,
And I think that could go the same for being a woman and having
Mhm.
things said about you and things like that that make
Mhm.
you uncomfortable. I just we have to be careful sometimes. That's
yeah,
it. What about you, Liz? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
You're all girl, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
But well, because I mean, and also this speaks to earlier what you were saying, Richard, about being diverse. Like, a diverse place doesn't mean it's necessarily an inclusive space,
mm,
right? So, like, we might be there, but that doesn't mean what's being said is really inclusive of all different folks.
Sure.
And even though we're there, we could still be perpetuating a lot of messed up stereotypes
Yeah.
and racism, sexism, things like that, that still are very rampant in all spaces.
Sure.
Um, so, examples of stereotypical labeling or like exercises like that, like I'm never too fond of what's the game where you have to pretend to speak a different language,
oh,
and,
foreign movie.
and
Oh,
yeah, and
oh yeah.
yeah, that's not for me. Um, um, yeah, especially because we also what's there's so I have so many different thoughts. Just like thinking about folks where English is not their first language, right? And what messages are we sending to them? And then I grew up in a non-English speaking household too, like English and Tagalog household, and just like what does that say, right? And so it's never sat well with me. I think I just think about the messages we send and how we can easily erase those things. Like I
Sure.
definitely understand that we're doing things in the sake of comedy, right? But comedy, not only can it heal and bring people together, but it can also tear people apart and bring them down. Yeah, the intention and how we navigate it has to be done very carefully. Um, yeah, I'm thinking different moments. Yes, labeling. What else? Yes, people. in general, it's so weird. I grew up like I'm mostly in high school. I was trying really hard to reclaim my Filipino identity because I felt so erased, and so trying to appease so many Filipinos. Um, um, and then later in life, or maybe I just noticed this more as an adult, people don't even really register that I'm Filipino, or when I tell them, it kind of like, goes wherever. And so it's so weird how things flip flop. So then sometimes I find myself in the improv space, and then people will say something really messed up about Asians or Filipinos, and I'm like, hello, I'm right here. Yeah.
Right.
And it's so just like
Oh, no.
over. But then also same with my black side. So I said, what do you think I'm just a brown person,
Yeah.
like no background. So, oh God, I think what's interesting, what comes up for that comes up for me in this particular conversation, especially when talking about being a woman,
Yeah.
um, uh, is mostly men just like talk all over me in improv scenes.
Okay.
Again, or I'm a sexual object. I had one time where I was doing a game with these two other dudes, and they talked directly over me, and they didn't. I was talking and trying to talk to them, and they just ignored me.
Oh, wow.
They literally just talked over me. And then it wasn't until the scene was called off and that I said, you were speaking over me, that they were like, oh, yeah. And it was like, whatever.
Right.
And so stuff like that, because also the sexism tends to just sort of like just be pushed aside. They're like, yeah, but he didn't mean it. So let's just keep going. Yeah, because I think there's a way to call out and call in, and then keep it pushing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our stuff is exposed that we don't know that's there, that we say.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I think when starting improv, I had to face a lot of stuff that I was like, whoop, didn't know that was there. Oh my goodness, really got to have to reflect on that or where that comes from. So I get it. It's not, I'm definitely not advocating for like scolding people or anything like that. But I think there's a way to be like, why don't you reflect on why you did that
Yeah.
and did that to this particular person or spoke over this person. But yeah, being a woman of color in the space is very hard, especially like those clapping games
Hmm.
and all the men are just like clapping over you. And then, yeah, I guess that's what I notice a lot too. Especially when those dudes spoke over me, I will not forget it. It was like such a reflection of just like how men disregard women and women of color and what they have to say and everything. And I was like,
Well, it's good that we're having these conversations because I think sometimes we just need to reflect on our own actions and be like, oh, I don't want to be that person, you know? What about you, Rich, as a teacher? Like, what do you, or was there ever an experience and held together that really didn't sit with you well? That
Yeah, you mentioned fortune cookie earlier.
Mhm.
I don't bring that into my class anymore. I did because that's what we did. That's and I think there's a certain amount of well, that's just what we've done,
Sure.
that I think we're kind of looking at now and being like, just because we've done it doesn't mean we need to keep doing it,
Sure, yeah. That's why it's good
Uh,
to reflect, right? And listen and
yeah,
everything.
because even stuff like Liz, you mentioned foreign movie, like even with that game, because that's been sort of a staple in the level 1 class, that I actually have not really brought in recently either, because I would find myself not accepting answer or suggestions for certain countries or certain, like, no, that's gonna, like, we're not gonna do that, like that's gonna you know
Yeah.
but then I would think like, well, but wait, like, am I, like, why am I only concerned about this, this group?
Yeah.
I this is more of a student. I went to a different improv school last summer, that we their focus was on narrative improv, and I was in their second, that was in like their character class, and in this one class they brought in a guest instructor, a white English man, and we were going to be talking about accents and what accents we could do in class.
Oh,
And they were like, but before we go into this, let's have a discussion about this. And I thought, oh, that's cool, you know. And it was primarily white people in the class. There were two Asian women, and I think that's it. I think it was them and me.
Okay.
And as the conversation went on, the what was okay, what was deemed okay to make fun of or to emulate was any sort of American accent. So, you know, Southern, New York, Texas, whatever,
All right.
because it's America. And then the Western European countries. So we could do a French accent. We could do an Italian accent. Those are okay. But you wouldn't do, we shouldn't do, you know, we shouldn't do any sort of Latinx accent. We shouldn't do any sort of uh, Asian accent. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, my last name is Martinez. Like,
Mhm.
I not that
Good
I
argument.
can or I want to, because I'm not, accents are just not in my wheelhouse. But like like I remember thinking this conversation's not for me. This
Mhm.
conversation is for the white people in the room to determine what is okay for them.
Mhm.
And that was actually my last class. I didn't go back after that.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't necessarily, it wasn't like, oh, I'm done with that. There were a couple of things, but it was a very white space, and I just remember thinking, you know, there were, you know, like you could develop your own like narrative shows eventually, but you had to first go through like Shakespeare and Jane Austen,
Mhm.
and you know, and those are fun. I have fun playing those, but when you play those and you are not white, you are, if you play true to who you are, then you are the servant over there with no lines, you know, Tennessee Williams as well. Um, or you erase what you look like to play this game or to be a part of this thing.
Mm.
And I think that a lot sometimes when we do it comes up when we do like some of like the long form like clap in or narrative shows where we do put ourselves into like a time era, you know.
Mhm.
uh and I think, well, all right, so we're on the Titanic or we're in wherever. If I'm playing like who who am I playing right now? Like, what does my character look like? Uh, and it's probably white, you know, because if I'm playing a black character or a Mexican character, one, I'm probably not on the Titanic as a passenger. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, and it just, you know, so there are those moments where you have to decide what am I going to do here? And then also like, it's fun and I'm playing a game, and that's, you know, so it's like, it's that like, I want to do this, but also this stuff is happening. And so as a teacher in classes, I try as much as I can, and I don't think by any means that I succeed 100% of the time, but I try to create a space where where the suggestions I take or the exercises I do don't uh, set people up to be hurt, um,
Mhm.
because that's, I value so much the amount of positivity that teaching gives me. And
Mhm.
there have been moments, maybe not necessarily racially motivated, but negative moments in classes where I've walked away from a class thinking, like a night, and just thinking, oh, gosh, that didn't go the way that I intended for it to go. You know,
Mhm.
I did have a class where a student said a phrase that had a negative racial connotation to it, and
Okay.
he did not, I 100% believe that he did not intend it the way that it came out, but it came out and we all heard it. And
Mm.
it was like, okay, as a teacher, I was like, well, fuck, what do I do with this? You
Right.
know, because I'm like, all right, all eyes
Mhm.
are on me. What, like,
All right. Now what?
you know, um, and you know, it's what I've learned is I just have to, depending on the situation, because there've been some situations where I haven't called it out immediately because it would put the person who was on the receiving end of it under the spotlight, and that would just lead to more hurt. And I don't want that. But in each of these, I have had some difficult conversations with people, and honestly, like, I think those are, I said earlier I was grateful for some of the negative experiences I had as a kid. I think I'm also grateful for those because it also shows me what I will stand up for and what I want to stand up for, because I'm trying to do more than I ever have before, especially, given the climate of the world right now where, we may not be able to affect change on the macro level, but individually on a person to person is where we can.
Well, I wanted to speak to what you were saying about how, say, these like period pieces that are like these different eras you have to play in.
Yep.
That you're like unsure. Do I play it like how it really went down, or can I play somebody outside of my class status or whatever? And I think it's so possible that we can rewrite and create and be these characters that we don't really see on like PBS. Like you could be Mr. Darcy if you wanted to. I think it's. We also have to check in, like, can the people around me accept that I am accepting who I am as a person and still playing this role?
Yeah.
Like, can you all get with the program, or are you going to try to like shift it back to a way that you think it's supposed to be? Because I think us stepping into those roles, giving the opportunity to play those roles, I think will really help shift a lot of things. Because yeah, I think it's important. Like obviously, with that particular other school that you were mentioning too, like yeah, that conversation in terms of accents, that conversation wasn't for you, because I think as a person of color, you can play the accent of wherever you're from, but also like accents are a bit limited, and that's okay. I think sometimes people get really frustrated in being limited in stuff. They're like, but I want to do the Japanese accent. And it's like, you like there's so, again it might result in harm, and is it worth resulting something in harm just so that you can prove that you can do this? Like, who is this really for? Are you still acting or doing this with community in mind, or are you just really trying to prove that you can do all these things, right? Yeah, so I think that can get into really messy waters, but it's okay to like play in other ways, and then and not be able to do certain accents because it can be harmful. But yeah, I just wanted to say I think if you're ever in those situations again, I think you should definitely play the captain of the ship. You should play Jack. You should play all these these roles, because I think when we're in the role of writing them, or like being able to navigate how this goes, I think we should really lean into that and be like, yeah, I am the main character, or yeah, I am the person who owns, all of this, or you're actually the servant, not me,
Right.
And and we could still call it out, like the fact that we're Black folks, and you're like, yep, this is what it is. But yeah, because I think those things are really important too. Because I also notice when maybe I take on certain roles, how the person I'm playing with will react to it. Sometimes they're on board, sometimes they're not.
Right.
And, but I think what really comes out is, I don't know, if you're already on the outside in your everyday life, sort of thinking critically and expanding, then that your worldview, then I think that comes into your improv and your performances. I think if you might be a little bit more narrow-minded in some ways, that comes out.
Yeah.
And I think we can really help folks shift with how we perform and how we name things for them.
Yeah, I think it's something to think about, right?
Yeah.
Being mindful when you see somebody on stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think if you're already mindful as a person, then that comes out.
Yeah.
And how you play with others.
Yeah.
So that's just what I think.
Yeah. I've been labeled as characters that I maybe weren't necessarily due to race, but what I knew, like, oh, this is your intention for what the label you just gave me is comedic at the expense of this type of person you're having me play.
Mm-mm-mm.
And I've been in scenes where I've tried to like, okay, I've got this label, I got to do it.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can rise above and try to transcend what the intention was.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be in a scene with someone who's not there and is not going to transcend it. And I'm like,
Oh, mm.
all right, well, this just got really uncomfortable. Now we're in an
Yeah.
uncomfortable scene. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
um, and and it goes to what we say in in level one. Like I tell the students, as soon as you say something in a scene, it is true. And so we accept the reality. If we are, if I say that I'm gonna, go charge my carburetor with my USB port, that is now true. I don't know about cars. That probably is not how you do them. But
I was like, yeah, sure,
yeah,
yeah.
you say it with
Sounds good
confidence.
to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like I can totally be the captain of the Titanic. Um, but yeah, like you said, it's about not just what you are going to do, but also who you're playing with, who's watching you, and what they are yes anding, what they are accepting,
Mm-hmm.
which can be uh, not always not always awesome, but then also other times like super awesome. Bridget, I think of the what was it? Strawberries at the Bottom of the Ocean, the Broken Legs musical we did last year,
Oh,
which
yeah.
inadvertently became a show about
Race, right?
race, which
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
any of us
I remember,
knew.
I remember watching it and I said, well, damn. And I could see it in your eyes that you're like, yeah, we're going there. Didn't think that this is what was going to happen, but here we are.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
definitely like once I think intermission happened and we had some conversations with people, it was like, oh, okay. But like during that first act,
I had no idea.
and it legit, like by accident, the characters on one side were the people of color in the
Mm-hmm.
cast, and then the other, and it was like, and that wasn't on purpose, and it was just like,
It was not.
yeah, it
That was
was,
so memorable.
yeah, it was so, it was just really interesting, and those moments are like, all right, cool, look at this potential that we have to tell a story that, again, did someone come to see Strawberries at the Bottom of the Ocean and walk away and be like, well, now I believe in interracial marriage?
Right.
Probably not.
I'm dead.
But
And now I get loving versus Virginia. Now I get it.
right. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
History didn't show, but also when it's, our audience are people primarily that we know and love, and
Mhm.
and honestly, like, and this is going to get a little bit meta, but I think the audience who's watching this is going to, are going to see three people that they know and love talking about things that they probably haven't talked to us about, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it will be something that is like, oh, okay, that's my eyes are open to something that maybe they weren't open to before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think improv really makes the unconscious conscious. And so I think during that performance, a lot of unconscious things were happening.
Yeah.
And so you're like, oh, okay, well, what do we do with it now that it's here? How do we yes and, this story and where it's
Yeah,
going?
it's wild because I just remember at the time, it wasn't until I think it was over. I don't even think I got it even halfway through.
Mm.
People were just, wow, that was so like emotional and so current. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, that goes to show you that, we're just in the moment. We're
Mm-hmm.
doing our scenes, but then like there's this bigger, more important, like worldly message that we put out there without really intending. Cause like I don't think we even look at each other as color. We're just like each other's friends. We're family, and we just get labeled as something. We just go for it. But just sometimes it's just kismet. Things happen, and I don't know, magic happens, and that's all made up on the spot, right? That's what improv's about.
When you take race out of the equation and substitute it with something else, right? Like an allegory, like as this the Broken Legs musical is about like interspecies relationships, right? But it's so interesting how audiences, mostly white audiences, can be like, I get it. I wish that they were together. But then like you put it back to race and they're like, not so much. And I know that interracial relationships or marriages might seem like something of the past to folks. But really in practice, I'm like, I don't think so, right? And I know as a society, we're experiencing a more like biracial boom of like children. But like if we think about our experiences, for me, and it seems like for you, for both of you as well, there wasn't that many of us. really like around, right? And but
At all.
everyone's talking about, yeah, like no, it's fine. But I'm like, okay, come on, like let's really get real about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
You stood out like a sore thumb at that time.
Yep.
yeah, and so it's it's interesting what people will say, especially during a performance, and then what they believe in like everyday life or in practice. So it's really easy to get messages via performances. I feel like people will get X-Men. They're like, oh, they're like,
Yep.
um, what's the word I'm looking for? Like separating the mutants and treating them poorly. But like in real life, they're like, we're not treating Black people poorly.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
like, you get X-Men,
Yep.
you
Yeah.
get Utopia, you get strawberries at the bottom of the feed, like you get this, but you don't get,
Right.
discrimination. But yeah, so it's interesting, and I'm happy you all did that, and I know that it's going to continue because I know that when you perform with a more critical mind, that's kind of the performances you get.
Yeah.
Like when that's within people, I think that's what comes out. Something really beautiful and powerful.
I'm really excited to get back in front of a live audience, having gone through, and I know we perform, we we have held a part, and we do some of the like our live shows as well, like on Zoom via YouTube, but just it really excites me to get back on stage knowing that all of the emotions and the critical thinking and the self-examination that's happened in the last 8 months or whatever is going to be is going to come out in this in a creative way that
Oh yeah.
is
For
going to
sure.
is going to if if it doesn't touch anybody else, if it doesn't change anybody else, I know it's going to change me,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's going to go outwards.
Mm-hmm.
I can't predict the future, unfortunately. If I wish I could, it'd be great.
Right. Me too.
I know. I
um,
know.
we're gonna wrap up, but I feel like we have like scratched the surface.
Oh my God, there's so
I
much
want to do
more
more.
to
So I
talk
hope that
about.
we can get another conversation going soon, because um,
I would love that.
I just I much in the way that I said earlier, that people are going to learn, like even for myself, like just listening to each of you, like it's such an eye-opening experience,
Mhm.
Well, thank you
And
for having us.
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for having us. I think I was just thinking, like, I'm so curious, like for the three of us,
Mhm.
I think we also speak on a level that we know the other understands.
Mm.
So I'm like, I wonder if we sound really vague to
Mm.
people, because to me, I get what we're talking about,
Sure.
but like, yeah, stereotypical labels. And we're like, yeah, I know which ones you're talking about, because then, memories pop up. But I'm like, oh, I wonder, I don't know. Like, I know that this is a shared experience that we only understand.
Yeah.
So I'm just reflecting on, like, I wonder if how much people will really get from what we're talking about.
My hope would be that if they don't understand, or if they have questions, that because they are our friends and they are our community, that they'll reach out and
Mhm.
and connect with us and say, hey, like what has that what did you mean by that, or
Mhm.
there are people within the community that have I speak a lot about mental health issues,
Mhm.
and I've had a lot of people come up to, well, let me rephrase that. I've had some people come up to me with questions of, what can I do? How I want to be here for you. What can I do right now? And I don't have an answer for that, but it just makes me feel seen just
Mm.
to be asked,
Sure.
Well, we will leave this on a to be continued,
Yes.
because I think this is going to be um, something that I think speaks to people, and honestly, I just want to hear more from you. Like, um, um, thank you both for sitting down um, and having this conversation.
It has been great just learning more about the two of you and our shared experiences. And it'll be interesting when we meet again after the election, what our conversation could be like then.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. This conversation was so fascinating. I have so many questions that I just want to ask the both of you, and that I really want to like deep dive
Digging in a
in.
little deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should get a Patreon going, Richard. You're like, pay us, and
Here's
then we
more.
will do some more content.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
But
want
yeah,
the unvague answers? Go to Patreon. Yeah.
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 Part 2.
Yeah. Part 2, the deep dive.
On the surface right now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And this is going to air after the election ends.
Okay.
Hopefully. Well, I mean, who knows?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just who trying to put the good stuff out there, you know.
Good vibes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, I mean, if anything, this election has really exposed, you know, everyone's thinking that we live in this post-racial world, which is not true, right?
Yeah.
Which our childhoods, our adulthoods all speak to, right? And, you know, a lot of people are shifting. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Because I mean, it will definitely influence how I do improv.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know, so
Yeah.
hoping for the best.
me too.
All right. Well,
Thank you for having us.
thank you.
Love you guys.